Hey everybody! So recently I posted this video that I worked on a few months ago for the Waymaker Institute, and a few of you were interested in knowing a little bit how I did some of the scenes and how I built the whole thing. So I figured I would go through at least one of the scenes to show you the work that was involved and sort of the steps that I took to get there. So this will be the scene that I am going to cover for today. So I'm going to play it for a second.
Waymaker Institute offers a unique approach to education. This is not a substitution to traditional higher education, but rather a bridge to it, making a way for high school graduate students to effectively discern and affirm their call to ministry.
Okay, so that's about the scene we'll cover, and really the whole project is fairly similar to that in the sense that there's this white kind of cyc wall look, and then you have some 3D elements that are inside of there. Even just the very beginning, it sort of does this. You can see these are in 3D space, so they kind of move in like a parallax style. Really, a lot of these little pieces are so. I figure we'll just cover that one main scene, which is right here. Just for me, it has some cool elements like the this building over here is separate. It's really subtle, but you can see that the green brick wall back there with the windows is separate from the pillars, so it gives it even more of a 3D feel. I thought that'd be kind of fun to go over. The hats were made in Cinema 4D. We can go through that pretty quickly, but I won't cover that too much. Really, I'm just focusing on the After Effects side of things and setting up these little elements in 3D space. So let's jump in. All right, so this is the main project. This is how I have it built. It got kind of messy, so I had to organize a little bit. I have my assets folder that has just a whole bunch of stuff in it. This one got a little unorganized as I went through, so forgive me for that. And then we have down here is just all the different scenes that are making up this project. So this is the scene that we're looking at right here. And so if I went into this scene, it would have all the little pieces that make up this project. So this is kind of what we're going to build right here. All right, so let's jump in. I'm going to just make a new composition. I'm going to use some of these layers, but I'll show you how I cut them out and prepped them for the scene. But I'll try to do as much as I can from scratch for the time that we have. All right, so I'm going to make a new composition and pretend like this is a new project. So I'm going to click on this little button down here, and we'll just call this tutorial comp. 1920 by 1080 is good. We'll make it a little bit longer, so I'll say maybe 20 seconds, something like that. 24 frames a second is good. Hit OK. All right, so the first thing I needed to do was make the background. So what I did was I took let's go into, let's see, backgrounds. I can just look at it down here. So I have background main. I'm going to double click on that. And so you can see it's really just kind of a white background with a little bit of a texture to it. So there's this seamless, really subtle. Let me see if I can pull up a little bit more of you can see some of the subtleness to it, but it's kind of hard to see through here. But there's just a little bit of almost like a stucco type of drywall vibe. And so what I did is I put that into its own composition, which you can see here. It's just a square composition. And then I dropped that into the scene. So I would go into backgrounds and comps. This is the one I made. So I'm gonna drag it down here. So what happens is it drops it in right here. So sometimes you can find a really big image that you can use, but for this project I was going to be moving the camera left and right and up and down, so I needed to have a lot of space, and so I needed to make this a seamless texture so that when I added an effect called motion tile to it, it would look pretty seamless. So let me show you really quickly. So I click on this layer, I'm going to go to Effect and Stylize, I think, and Motion Tile. And so here it's just basically going to tile it. So I'm going to tell it the output width, we'll just call it 300, and we'll do the output height at 300, and hit enter. And you can go pretty big with this. Sometimes it will tell you like, hey, you've made it a little bit too big. But now you can see that it's pretty seamless. So wherever I move this image, you don't really see any corners of it, but I can make it a little bit bigger if I needed to, or scale it up. I'm only at 58, so I could go to almost 100, and I have a lot of room to play with. So it's pretty hard to see the edges. Now, it's not going to do that unless you have a seamless texture. So if I just drag in some paper texture, it's not going to be seamless. So what you need to do is make a seamless texture in Photoshop. So let me open up Photoshop really quick and I'll show you how to do that. All right, so when Photoshop opens up, I'm going to make it a perfect square. So we'll call this, I'm going to do 1400 by 1400, not inches. We don't want to do that. Pixels, 1400 by 1400. And we will, resolution's okay. We'll hit create. So now I have this perfect square. So I would want to use a some sort of textured background. So I have this paper background here. So what I'm going to do is just drag that in, and I'm going to scale it up to fit my entire composition here, and hit OK or hit enter. So now, so if I were to take this and drag it into, let me show you really quickly. If I go in here and I import the, let me go find that project. Nope. All right, so if I drag this, if I imported this paper background and I put it into this background main square and I scale it up and I go back to my composition, you can see now that I'm going to start seeing these seams within the tile. So this one's pretty good. It's not that bad, but you can see here I have a nice hard line there and hard line there. So really, if you had a rough texture that had different styles to it, then you're gonna, or different, random variations in the texture, then you're gonna have some issues. So I needed to get some nice seamless sides on that. So I went back to Photoshop, made a square, and then what I'm gonna do is I want to cut this out as a square. So right now you can tell that it's pretty big. So I need to make this image a perfect square. So what I'm going to do is go to my little marquee tool. I think that's what it's called. I'm just going to drag and make it the exact same size as the composition. So then with that selected, I'm going to hit Command J to make a copy. And this background paper, we can just turn that off for now. So now I have a perfect square of this paper. The next thing we need to do is go into filter. I think filter, let's see, other, offset. Yeah, I think you go to other and then offset, and we're going to tell it to be 700 by 700. So the reason I'm doing that is because I want it to be just split right down the middle. So if the document is 1400 by 1400, I want to split down the middle horizontally and vertically. And so when I do that, you can see that now there's this line sort of running through here just like that right in the middle. So that looks good. I'm going to hit OK. So now everything is seamless on the outsides. The only problem is we need to remove some of these lines on the inside. So the way I'm going to do that is with the stamp tool, the clone stamp tool. I'm going to hit S on the keyboard, and that's going to give me this brush-looking icon here. And then I want to just paint out these hard lines that we have. So I'm going to just pick an area somewhere over here, probably. I don't love how this one's really splotchy, so I'm going to go over here. And I'm going to hold down Alt and Option, and it's going to give me this little crosshair. And basically, it's saying you want to pick this section over here, and then I'm going to let go of Alt and Option, take my mouse over here, and then I can paint, and it's going to basically paint what's happening over here. So you can see now I'm starting to remove some of those lines. So we'll just kind of move our way down. I don't want any big defining character or features in this texture, because those will probably show up pretty easily once it's tiled. So that looks good. Then we'll do the same thing for this section over here. So again, I'm holding down Alt and Option somewhere on the texture, clicking, taking my mouse up to where I want to paint over it, and just painting over that hard line. So that's not perfect. Now I don't want to go all the way to the edge. I just want to go right up to the edge, just like that. Okay, so that looks pretty good. All that looks pretty solid. You could probably paint out some of this stuff over here if you didn't want any of these hard textures, but we won't get into all that. Okay, so end of the day, I think I ended up desaturating it a little bit, but you would basically just export this as a JPEG, and now you have this seamless texture all the way around. And then I'm going to go back to After Effects, and the one that I ended up using was just this seamless one that you're looking at right here. So really subtle, just wanted a little bit of texture and a little bit of variation in the background. So we'll go back to my tutorial comp, and I've dropped that in. I added the emotion tile, made it pretty big. I'm going to scale that up to be pretty large there. Okay. So the next thing I did, I believe we made it 3D. Let's see here. Yeah, so now we're gonna make our environment a 3D environment. So I'm gonna go back to the tutorial comp here, and I'm gonna make this um, composition a 3D layer. Now, if you don't see these little boxes over here that you can check, I'm gonna click on toggle switches and modes. And that's gonna give me some more options, and I'm gonna click on this little cube right here. I'll highlight that. All right, so now my layer is 3D. So what does that mean? Is that it just basically means I can move it in 3D space. So I have a Z axis. So if I take my mouse right on top of that blue arrow, it gives me a Z, and I can push that. I'm gonna hold down shift so that it makes some big moves. So I can push that in, wave in the back. I could rotate it, so I could hit W on the keyboard for my rotate tool. I could put my cursor right on top of that and sort of rotate it in 3D space. It's obviously very flat. There's nothing to it besides just like a piece of paper. All right, so now we have our 3D space set up. This all looks good. The next thing I needed to do was bring in some of the elements. So let's see what we have first. Let's see, we have the bridge. We'll come back to that. Logo animates. We have the apple. So we'll do this apple and these books, and then we'll talk about the text in a little bit. So for the apple, we're just cutting those out in Photoshop. I'm not going to go through that too much, but I would download the images that I needed. Let's see if I can find where that was. I started just throwing my images in here a little willy-nilly, so it's probably in here somewhere. Let's see. So paint strokes, people. There's the apple right there. It's in the people folder because that makes perfect sense. So just take that in here, and I won't go through this too much, but just cut this image out. You can, when there's a lot of the same color in the background, if it's pretty high contrast, you could just use your magic wand tool. Make sure your tolerance is pretty low there. Keep adjusting that. I'm gonna hit W for that wand tool. So you can get pretty close. Come in here and hold down shift and click through a few more layers of that white there. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. We'll just go for that for now. So I can hit Command J to cut that out. Oops, actually I need to right click and do select inverse. And now I have my apple selected, so I can hit Command J, and I have an apple that's cut out good enough for now. That's just a quick way to how to do that. You could fine tune it with doing your eraser tool or something like that. But for the sake of the tutorial, we're not really spending time much in Photoshop for this one. We want to spend time in After Effects. So I have those images cut out. Then I'm going to go and import those. If you want to import those, you can hit Command I to import your new files, or File, Import. For now, I'm just going to go in and grab the ones I've already done. So the ones I actually did, I realized that I actually didn't cut the apple out in Photoshop, but I just did it with a quick pen tool inside of After Effects. So let me go open up this little apple here. So I put the apple and the books together. So we'll do that same thing. I'm actually going to just copy this layer here. So this is just a JPEG. This is that apple we just cut out, but I used the pen tool to draw a little path around it, or a little mask around it. So we'll just use that for now. So I'm going to copy that. Go back to my tutorial comp. But what we want to do is make a separate composition to keep some of those things organized. So I'm going to close this down. So I made a tutorial folder, put the tutorial comp in here, which is what we're looking at. And then I just made a new apple and book composition. So to make a new composition, again, you click on this little button, set your settings that you want, and hit OK. So now we have this apple and book composition, and I've pasted this apple in here. So the thing I did next, once you have your image in here, you do want to make that a 3D layer. So again, the way to do that is to click on toggle and switches, and or just make sure you can see these little squares here. Then click on this cube to make it a 3D layer, and you get this new little set of axes, and it's a Y, X, and Z. Nothing, we don't need to worry about that too much quite yet. What we want to do is animate the that little bounce that we had in there. So if you can see here, it kind of animates in like that. I think I might show an easier way to do this. So what I'm going to do is, because one thing that would happen is I could, just to speed up some time, is I could go in here and set my scale to 0, and then it goes up, then it goes back down, then up again. And all that would be good. I could then copy these keyframes and paste it onto the book and make it do the same thing. The problem is the size of the books are going to be a little bit, it's just going to be different than the Apple. So then I would have to go in and adjust all of these separately. None of that really matters. What really matters is I'm going to show you how to do this and save yourself some time, unlike I did in this project. So go back to my Apple in book. And so what I'm going to do is make a new null object. All right, so I'm going to go to layer, and I'm going to go to new, and I'm going to go to null object. So this is kind of like a pretend layer. So click on null object, and it gives you this little red square, and that just, it's just like an invisible layer. So what we want to do is I'm going to treat this as my scale. So I'm going to be scaling this little square, and then I'm going to attach my apple to that. And the reason I'm going to do that is because then I'm going to bring in those books, and I'm going to duplicate this null and attach the books to it. That way I don't have to do the scale up and down, up and down, up and down for the books. So first thing we're going to do is attach our apple to this null. So I'm going to put this null where I want this apple to scale up from. So if I want the apple to scale up from this bottom little corner down here, then I would just click this little crosshair and put it right there where the apple is. And we'll do that for now. That'd be fine. So now I need to tell After Effects to that whatever this null does, I want the apple to do. So the way to do that is to grab this little pick whip right here, not this one, but your main little swirly line right there. It's called a pick whip. So I'm going to click it on the apple, and I'm going to drag it up to the null object, and I'm going to let go. So now you can see that the apple is connected to the null right there. I can change this to call this scale. All right. So now if I hit S on the keyboard, I have my scale, and it's at 100%. So that's great. So now when I duplicate this, it's just going to go off these parameters here, which will be great for the books, and really any layer that's going to be used. All right, so how did I have it bounce in and bounce out really quickly? Is I just hit S on the keyboard, then I'm going to set a couple of keyframes. So I'm going to click on scale to get that little stopwatch to light up, the little blue stopwatch there. Now you can see it's made a keyframe. I'm going to drag this down. We want it to scale up pretty quick, so we're going to do all this within about a second or so. So I'm going to move that down here. So this is going to be my end point. All right, so I'm going to click on the plus key to zoom in a little bit. And now I want this down here to be 0. All right, so I know that I want my apple to, it's got to overshoot my last little section there. So I need to go a little over 100. So I'm going to move ahead a few frames, and I'm going to click over here, and I'm going to say maybe 108. I'm going to click ahead again. I want to keep these fairly even. And so now I'm going to go, instead of 108, I'm going to go below 100 and say 94. So I'm kind of going and the difference of 2 every time. So at 108, 94, so I'm going to go up here and say 104. I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to say this is 98. Now we're going to go a little bit smaller. I'm going to say 101. And we could even go smaller again and say 99.5. So it's getting smaller and smaller every time. So something like that. And there's other ways you can do it. You can download presets to do all this, but this is kind of the manual way to do it. And there's probably expressions that's for smarter people than I am. So then I'm going to click and drag and highlight all these keyframes. I'm going to hit, I'm going to right click on a keyframe and go to keyframe assistant and go to easy ease. That's just going to make it a little bit smoother. So now if I render this out, you can see that apple kind of hops in and does this little bounce. Perfect. So that's how I got that. So now we can consider that one done. And I can move this. I could actually call this position and scale. Okay. So now I just want to ignore this apple layer. So I'm going to click on the position and scale, and I can move that. Oops. Let's see. Maybe I can just lock that. You click on the null. There we go. Click on that little red square there. All right. So we had our books that we need to drag in. So let me go find those really quick here. Let's see here. Books. All right. So these were a PNG file already. So I'm going to drag these in. So you can see these are really big. I'm going to scale these down. I think I got most of these from Pexels or Pixabay or something like that. All right. So this looks good here. I'm going to put that below the apple. And I want that to be a 3D layer. And I believe, let's see, what did I do color-wise? So I made these sort of a tint. To do that, I added a tint, copy, and book. So you can go to Effect, Color Correction, and Tint, and then you can change, I want to keep the black as black, and then I think I made this sort of a teal, something like that. All right, perfect. The apple's black and white, and I think I just did that with a tint as well. Let's see. Put a levels on there to give some contrast. That's all in color correction as well. And then black and white layer. Those are all in color correction. Okay. So Apple and book. So now we have this going on. Now I need to do the same thing that I did with the apple. So I'm going to duplicate this position and scale for the apple, this null object that we made. So I'm going to do that with Command D. Or yeah, Command D, we'll say. And I'm going to hit enter, and we'll call this book. So now I want the book to connect to that null object. So I'm going to again grab that little pick whip, move it up to book. So now they should scale up at the same time. Boom. So that looks good. I don't want them to move at the same time, so I'm just going to grab, let me put this up here. We'll recolor these so I can keep them separate. So we'll take the position in book, or that null and the actual book object. I'm just going to move it down just a little bit. So now they kind of come in separately. All right, so I'm actually going to put those back down here, but keep them together. There we go. All right, so they kind of scale up like that. You also need to make your null objects 3D as well. Okay, so now what we can do is move these in 3D space with the position and scale. So I'm going to take this apple. I'm going to take my mouse right on top of that blue arrow right there, and I'm just going to scoot it forward some. And that's so that when in the other composition, there'll be a little bit of a separation whenever we move left and right, and you'll see what I'm talking about in a bit. All right, so that looks pretty good. Yeah, let's go with that for now. All right, so I'm going to back to my tutorial comp. Now I can drag in that new Apple and book composition that I made, which is right here. Put that right on top. And we can see it scale up right there. So now, if I were to view this in 3D space, these layers would be somewhat separate. And we'll get to that in just a bit when I make a camera. Actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and do the camera. Let me double check that's what I did. Camera, no, yep, okay. So, tutorial comp, now we need to make a camera. And this is where a lot of people get kind of confused about what the camera does and how to use it. So I'll try to explain it best I can. So I'm going to go to Layer, New, and Camera. And that's going to give you some options here. Most of the time, these settings are okay for you. You can change the focal length and all that good stuff, but you'll have these options later on too. We'll just hit OK. So it makes this new camera right here. All right. You can control everything with the camera if you want. Usually I attach it to another null object, just so for me it's a little easier to control that way. But if you did want to use the camera, you can. You just have to make a few more steps. You can toggle this down, go to kind of set some keyframes for the point of interest, position, and orientation, and you can hit C on the keyboard to get some of your camera tools. So I can rotate. Let's see here. All right, so one thing we do need to do is when you're playing with 3D layers inside of a 3D environment is turn on this little button right here. So basically we want the 3D properties that are inside of here to translate over to this composition, because if you don't click this button, it's going to see this as a flat 2D layer, and that's not what we want. And also need to turn on that 3D. So now you can see there it sort of recognizes these different layers, and that's what we want. So now if I had my camera tool, And let's go to some of these. So if I like try to rotate this, so now you can see I'm seeing all these different 3D layers. So my books are right up against that wall, which is not what we want, but you can see it's a little bit different. It's a little bit separated. Okay, so this feels a bit big, so I'm going to go in here and just scale this entire layer down, and we can move that over. All right, so that's on the right path so far. The next thing I did is I think I threw in some pieces of paper or something. Let's see. So we have some paper back here in the background that may all be in the Apple layer. Let's see. No. So yeah, I took what I did is I downloaded. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Yep. Just something from Unsplash, and it is just some writing, like a high res page out of a book. And you can do a blending mode on that. I think the first thing I did was got rid of the color, so I went to Effect, Color Correction, and hue and saturation, and you can just kill that altogether. Then you can do blending modes. So I'm hitting Shift and plus and minus, and it will toggle through your blending modes here. So you can get it to usually multiply, I think is, or add maybe, screen maybe, I don't know. One of these I'm sure is fine. Something like that. Pen light, who knows. Several different options there. So I'm going to scale this down. Actually, we can make it 3D as well. Pretty much all your layers are going to be 3D. So again, clicking that little cube, scale this back some. And I can move this over here. And this won't be perfect, but you'll get the picture. So we could do a couple of these. I could duplicate that, Command D. I can move it up in 3D space and kind of move it over here. That's obviously the wrong blending mode. But I don't really want it in front of the book, so maybe I need to push it back some. So you can see as you push it back, it goes behind those books. I also need to push back my main background, so I'm just going to click that and move it back as well. Okay, so pin light's probably not the option I want. And again, I'm clicking those layers and just holding down Shift and going through plus and minus. It's not exactly what I did, but we'll just go with that. And I dropped the opacity to 50. So that works. Or I could even go a little more. T. You can hit T for opacity, which is a shortcut. All right, so that'll work for now. Let's see, what else did we do here? So for this section, we also have this little shadow. To do that, I think I just put a shape layer down there, or a, yep, okay. So to do a shadow, I made a new layer. Close those down for a bit. Go to layer, new solid, and I'm going to change the color to pretty much black. Hit OK. It's going to just fill my screen with a solid color. So now I need to draw a little mask around that. So I'm going to go up to the rectangle tool, click on that, and go down to the ellipse tool. Then I'm just going to draw a circle. All right, so that's pretty good. Then I'm going to, so I have a mask now on top of that solid, and you can see it right here. You can hit MM on the keyboard a couple times to get some other options. And I'm going to feather that out like that. And then it's a little too round, so I want to sharpen up these edges some. So I'm going to click on some of those points, and you can pull these little handles in if you want to get a little more accurate there. And it's not going to be perfect, but for now it's fine. So there we go. And I'm going to scale this down a little bit, S on the keyboard. Again, also need to make that 3D. So once I make it 3D, my anchor point is way up here, and I don't really want that. I'm going to hit Y on the keyboard to click and move that down here, just so I can keep it all together. All right. So there's my shadow. You can do some blending modes. You might want to change the color of that shadow a little bit so you can get some different options on your shadow, but you can get something real subtle like that, which is nice. Maybe make it just a bit bigger. It's kind of a nice look. You can drop that opacity down maybe some. Gets a little more of that texture in there. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Going back to our reference here. Now there are some of these little lines that animate right here. You can see them flying out. I won't go into I'll go into it a little bit, but really for my sake of time, I ended up just using some pre-made effects inside of After Effects that you can download and import into your After Effects project and use those just for me to save time. But if I did want to make those, I'll try to go through that real quick. I'll do a very rough version of it. So I'll make a new composition, and we'll just call this line animation, and hit OK. So I would draw a shape layer. I'm going to go through this somewhat fast. So I'm clicking G on the keyboard for my pen tool. I'm going to click and just draw a line, something like that right there. So now you have this simple line. You can change your thickness or color up here. We'll just leave it for now. And then if you toggle these little menus down, you get this add option. Click on that. I'm going to go to trim paths, and I can toggle that down, and then I can set my start and end point. So we'll just say, I think I want to make these all the same. So I'm going to put this at 0. So now my line is gone. And basically what a trim path does is it just animates out. Let's see, hide that. So it just animates the line out like that. Okay, so we'll be at 0. I'm going to click on my stopwatch to make those keyframes, move forward here. I think it's pretty quick animation. And I think we'll put both of these at 100. So it's sort of, you're not going to see anything because as it's growing, it's shrinking again. So what we need to do is add some easy ease to that. So right click or highlight your keyframes, right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease. And I'm going to go to my graphic editor. And again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this part. I would definitely recommend looking up some tutorials on the graphic editor. Let's see what's going on here. So you get the idea. It's probably going a whole lot faster than that. It happens pretty fast. So then I would go in here, and my crosshair is right in the middle there, so that's what I want. But I'm going to take my points, and again, I'm using the pen tool, and then I'm going to select both of those, put those maybe somewhere over here, and now it kind of whoop, animates. And there again, there's probably another faster way to do this that I don't know about. You can let me know. So then I would probably duplicate this layer, hit rotate, maybe move it 10 degrees, duplicate it again, rotate, let's make that 20 degrees, Command D to duplicate again, rotate, make that 30 degrees, and we'll just close it down for now. Then you could probably offset these a little bit. That might be kind of neat. Let's see. So that's how you could make something pretty cool. I think theirs is all at the same time, but you get the idea. So maybe you can play around with that and learn something new. Okay, moving on. I won't go into all that detail too much. So we have comp, scene 3. We'll go into the text in a little bit. So then I had this bridge sort of animate out. So first, before we add in some more elements, let's talk about the camera animation. So I'm going to go back to my main composition, and I have I'm going to relabel this here as shadow. All right, move this down here under the Apple and Book. And so now we have the camera. So let's talk about animating the camera. We have our 3D space. Everything seems to be working pretty well, but I want to move the camera around. And again, like I said, you could go into the camera settings and set some keyframes. But for me, it's just easier to do a null object. So I'm going to do layer, new, and null object. Think of the null object as kind of like your cameraman or maybe like your tripod. So we'll just call this camera movement. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to make this a 3D layer. And we want to connect the camera to basically like you're putting it in the hands of the cameraman or on a tripod. So I'm going to hit grab the little pick whip and move it up to the camera movement. Now we can pretty much leave the camera alone for now until we want to mess with some focal links and stuff. But so The first thing that we kind of focus on as it animates in is the uh, books and the apple. So let's move the camera to where this is dead center of the frame. So what I want to do is adjust the position. So I'm going to toggle down the um, null object properties, go to transform, and we're going to click on position. I don't really think we need to mess with the rotation right now. So we'll set our first keyframe. I'm going to leave it right here so I can see the books. And then I'm going to use the controls up here, so this X and Y axis to move. So I'm just going to slide that over to where that's dead center. So that looks good right there. So that's where we're just going to sort of animate in. And then it's going to talk for a bit, and then it's going to slide over. So what I want to do is I want the camera to sit here for a second. So I'm going to highlight that keyframe, copy and paste. And then at about from 2 to 4 seconds, I want it to slide over to the right, something like that. So you can see how the apple and the books still have that separation, which adds a nice little touch. All right, so you can tell that the keyframe movement is a bit stiff, and I would highlight those, right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease, and then again I would go to the graphic editor, and you can control that movement by adjusting the speed graph. So you can click on this, go to edit speed graph, and you get this line. So this is just telling you it starts, goes pretty fast, then comes back to a slow ending. So I'm going to highlight that keyframe, move it over here. So this is basically saying I want you to start pretty slow, go really fast, and then slow down again pretty gradually. So let's see what that looks like. It's got to render for a second here. So it kind of slowly starts and then it slides over quick like that. Awesome, perfect. Okay, so the next thing I did was the bridge. We'll get into the text in a minute. Let's talk about the bridge for a bit. So I had a image of a bridge, and it was a bit of a task to cut out. Let me see if I can show you the actual image of the bridge. That's the one I cut out. Let's see here. It's in one of these folders. This is the bridge right here. So this was sort of a pain to cut out. So I went in here and I had to cut out all these little sections. So that took some time. But again, just using those Photoshop tools with drawing mask and using my eraser tool to cut those out. So that gave me the bridge, which was right here. So I put that into a separate composition, just like this. So I just kind of clicked it, and you can drag it right on top of a composition button, and it'll make you a brand new comp to that size. All right, so I'm just going to undo that real quick. So inside of this, where'd it go? Where'd my bridge? There it is. So inside of here, I wanted to feel kind of like it was growing. I didn't want it to grow too smooth. I wanted to grow kind of stuttery, I guess, almost like a ladder ticking. So the way to do that was to draw a mask around my layer, and you can see how it kind of grows right there. So the way to do that was, let me just show you real quickly. I'll delete these. And so I want to set my keyframe. Actually, let me just delete this mask. So I have my bridge, and I want to draw a mask. So I go to the rectangle tool, and with that layer selected, I click and drag, and it draws a mask. Okay, so then I want to set my keyframe. So I'm going to hit M again to get that mask path. Click on the stopwatch. So that will be my final point right there. I'll move my playhead back down towards this end here, and then I'm going to hit V on the keyboard for my main pointer tool, and I'm going to click and drag that mask all the way to the end. I'm clicking the side, and I'm holding down Shift so this stays a nice straight line. Okay, so then I would progress a few keyframes. So I'm just going to use I think I have mine set up as like page up and page down to get a just move ahead per frame. So if I just watch this right now, if I just render this out, let's see if it'll show me something here. So you can see, I mean, it kind of still has that same vibe, but for some reason I just felt like it needed a little bit more. So you could go in and, actually I'm just going to draw these here. So I'm going to move ahead a few keyframes, and then I'm just going to set another keyframe. Move ahead a few, set a few. Move ahead a few, set one. Move ahead, set one. Something like that. Okay. So then it goes to the end. That works. So then you can highlight those, right click, and go to toggle hold keyframe. So basically, it's not gonna transition until it'll do it immediately as soon as it sees that keyframe. So now it's a little more. So I'd probably go a little more, not quite as chunky as that. Be a little smoother, but you get the idea. I could highlight these and I could maybe make that faster. Click on that option to click that and speed that process up. Okay, so once that was done, I drug that into, let's see, back to my tutorial comp, drug that bridge in there, put it below the book. I want to make that a 3D layer. And let's see, it's probably not animated in yet. There it is right there. So I'm going to, so basically what was happening there is like, why don't I see it, is because if I go into here, those keyframes that are animating are at 7 seconds. So if I wanted to be at the beginning, I just move this down to the beginning. So if I go back to my, so now it should animate right in the beginning. We'll want it to animate over here as that camera moves. So I need to scale this way down because it's obviously too big. So S on the keyboard, scale this down. And I'm going to hit V on the keyboard for my move tool. Move that over, it's still a little bit too big. Okay. So that looks pretty good. It's probably still a little big. All right. So it starts moving, that bridge grows, perfect. So then I did an animation inside of Cinema 4D, which I won't go into, but it was these caps that were just animating. So I just made some simple shapes inside of Cinema 4D, had maybe an emitter, launch them into the sky. So that would be a whole other day of tutorials to explain. So for now, we'll just keep with the After Effects stuff. But that's how I made those, was inside of Cinema 4D. Okay, so once I had that done, I drug it into, let's go back to here. I drug that into the comp as well. So we'll drag it below the bridge. And that's obviously way too big, so I'm going to scale that back. And I also want to make that a 3D layer. Again, you want to make pretty much everything a 3D layer. And we want this to be pretty much the same size, or in the same position as the bridge. So that looks good. And now I have these hats down here. I don't want all those hats in there, so I'm going to click on my rectangle tool. I want to draw a mask just to get the top of the bridge there. There we go. And I'm going to slide this layer down so that it kind of happens maybe just after the bridge animates. Probably somewhere around in here. I want those hats to fly up. There they go. So, okay, something like that. All right, so the next thing that I thought was pretty cool was the building. Let's take a look here. Hats go in the air. And then we have the building that kind of pops in right there. So really this is created the same way that I did with the book. So to get this building to have that 3D effect on the pillars, is I had to cut out multiple layers in Photoshop. So the image I used was, let's see if I can find it here, this one here. So I had to do a good bit of photoshopping to get a lot of this stuff out, so I kept most of this in here. And what I wanted to do was cut out everything, pretty much everything in white besides the window. So I went all around these pillars, around these bricks here, all inside of here. So I took out all of these bricks, and that gave me, let's see, I might have brought that in as a Photoshop document. Let's see. Okay, so what I did, let me open up the actual. All right, so yeah, here we go. Let me open up this Photoshop document here. All right, so you can see that I cut out everything pretty much in the actual picture. And so we have our main layer, which is this just the facade of this building. And then I went in and separated those things. So I have my columns right here. So I deleted or erased everything that was the brick and everything that was inside of this um, awning or whatever. And then I went in here and made the background. So I had to do a lot of painting. Again, using that clone stamp tool to replicate these bricks and the windows. Those were not there in the main, so I had to sort of recreate what that building looked like to the best of my ability. But you get the idea. So I saved that as a Photoshop file and just kept keeping those layers separate. So I renamed them wall and columns, and then imported that Photoshop document into After Effects. And so when you do that, you want to import it as, it'll ask you a few things like, if I do Control I, and I import, where did it go? Where did it go? College, right here. So if I import this, I don't want to import it as footage. I want to import it as composition and retain those layer sizes. So that way it'll bring in each layer by itself. That's what you want to do. So once I did that, I opened up the comp that it made, and it gave me these things here. Let's just move forward. So it gave me these options here. I brought these trees in separately. So this is what it gave me. So I made those 3D, and you can see right there, if I had the columns and the walls. If I were to rotate this wall, let's see, actually rotate the columns, you can see how they've been separated. And again, if they're just two flat layers and I pushed them in 3D space, push that wall back just a little bit to give some depth. So I'm obviously not going to go that far in the animation, but when you just move it just subtly like that, it has a really nice 3D feel. So that was what I was going for. So once you do that, you import your Photoshop document into there, you make your layers 3D, move them in 3D space with that Z axis a little bit, and then drop that into your composition. So let me do that real quick. That was the college, I guess it's this one here. I'm gonna drag that in, drop it right above the bridge, and let's see where it animates on. There it is right there, boom. So that's gonna happen somewhere around here. And I'm gonna scale this back. And it also does that little scaling thing where it bounces in, which is all well and good. You just do all that. You can do that same way we did the apple by making that null object and adjusting your scale, which will help. So that's kind of animated right there. So we don't want it to be right there. I'm actually going to make that a 3D layer. And again, if you want those 3D effects to come through this composition, you have to turn on this little little button there. I guess it's a continually rasterize or something like that. Collapse transformations. All right, so now all of our 3D layers. So if I hit W on the keyboard for my rotate tool, you can see that they're all there. Okay, so I'm just going to drag that over here, something like that. And I also had the, so you can see now as I drag it, you start seeing some of the walls sticking out on the side of these columns. The way I fixed that was just rotate it towards the camera a little more. So W, putting on that Y axis, and I'm going to rotate it just a little bit like that. Okay, probably even go a little more, trying to get that door centered up. Then I'm probably going to bring it forward a little bit because that bridge is starting to cut through. So I'm going to hit V on the keyboard for my pointer tool, grab that Z axis and scoot it forward some, just like that. Then also had those trees. So all that was inside of here. So I'm going to turn those back on. And there's one there. The other one is back here, so I can maybe move that over here like that. To cut those out, I won't go through that. It's for another day, but just found some trees and cut those out inside of Photoshop. Drug those in just like a 3D layer and moved them around a little bit. So now you can see they're in there right there. Now the trees, you can see now that the tree's sticking out a lot. If I go back to the college one, you don't see it as much. I have to scoot it pretty far back so that you don't quite see the base of that tree. It's sticking out down there a little more. Just drag it up some. All right, so good enough. That adds a little more depth to it. So the tree's behind the bridge, which is pretty cool. All right, so you also, to add some more realism, you want to add some more shadows. So we can go to the shadow here. I could just duplicate that, Command D, and I could drag this over to this one right here. That works for me. Then I can also drag it for the bridge. Um, but the problem is that shadow doesn't quite represent that bridge, so I'd probably sort of make a similar shape. It doesn't have to be perfect, but maybe something kind of similar. Probably turn that opacity down pretty good bit. All right, that's a little sloppy, but you know, you get the idea. See what it looks like over here. Zoom out. Yeah, so it's pretty thin shadow right there. All right, so for the text, it's pretty much the same thing. I would make those in separate. It's just a separate composition, just like we did the apple in the books. So I'd go down here, duplicate, make a new composition, call this text 1, hit OK. So for this, I brought in a text reveal that I had made in Photoshop. Let me show you that real quick here. So I made a few paint strokes inside of Photoshop just with some brushes. So you can see them right there, and you can add that, do like a color overlay or something on those. So let me just show you what the text actually looks like instead of rebuilding that just for time. Let's see what that first one looks like. All right, so unique approach. So what is this one comprised of? So we have this, let's see here. So I made a couple of stroke reveals. So we'll go in here. We have just a simple paint stroke, which is what you see, and then it kind of reveals on. And the way that that's happening is I have this. This is what I made inside of Photoshop, I believe, with just a bunch of brushes and doing it step by step. You know, I would go in, paint some grungy stuff in black, save that as a JPEG, paint some more grungy stuff in black, keep moving forward. So I had, you know, several, maybe 10 to 12 different images of this growing black grunginess. So that's just its own MP4 movie that's happening right there. And then I brought that in, and you can use that as a track matte. So basically, it's sort of like a clipping mask inside of Photoshop that whatever is black will be hidden and whatever is white will be revealed, or vice versa. So in this case, it's vice versa. I just have a Luma inverted matte on that. So you would put your the actual clipping mask or whatever on top of the layer that you want to reveal, and then this one would be off, and you would tell it, all right, I want my track matte to be Luma inverted, and it would give you this little symbol right there, and then you have, it's only revealing what your bottom layer is. So so then I believe I put a color on top of that to get this teal color. Then I have my unique approach, and again, that's doing the same thing. It sort of paints on right there, and that's again using that same track matte on top of my text layer, and then making my text layer that Luma inverted. And I can go through that in some other day, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. So that was how I built these out. Now these aren't separated in 3D space, I don't think. They're all just flat. So I brought that into my composition. So text 12, let's see. I'd put that above my apple and book. I still want to make this an actual 3D layer so that it moves with the camera. But if I scale this back like that, I can put this right here. And you can tell since my apple's pretty far forward, so I'm going to pull this forward here. I could probably move that apple back a good bit. I don't want to do that inside of here. Okay. So there's my text right there. So that's pretty much it. Then I'll make a, duplicate that same text comp and make my new text for this other section whenever the camera would slide over. I'd have another text layer pop up. It's probably 13 or something. Yeah, higher education. Make that a 3D layer. Scale that back. Push it forward. It goes down here, something like that. So that's how I built the scene out. And then I have a couple of camera movements, which again I would do all up here. So I would hit P on the keyboard, And if I wanted the camera to push into that bridge, I would, my keyframe stops right there. So I'd maybe go to 5 or 6 seconds. And then I want to adjust that Z axis. So I'm going to click and drag forward. And I had to do a few things. So once you push forward, you start seeing, oh wow, my layers are really far apart. So I'd have to adjust those some. But that's how I would do that. I'd add a little, make sure my curve on that was nice. And then kind of render this out for a second. You can see that it pushes in right there. Now, one thing that you might run into inside of After Effects is the fact that it assumes that you want it to do some weird curve on your camera movement. So you can see here it kind of flies to the right just a tad bit, like it's overshooting or something, and that just drives me crazy. So to fix that, if you're getting that with your camera animations, is highlight your camera keyframes, right click and go to keyframe interpolation, and you can tell it spatial interpolation. See how it says auto Bezier? You don't want that, just do linear and hit OK. So now it should do it. It should just push straight into that bridge. Sweet. Okay, so the next thing we could do is if you wanted to adjust you could go into the camera and adjust your depth of field. So I can hit U on the keyboard a couple times, and it'll show a bunch of parameters here. So my depth of field is on. I could bump up my focal distance. That's kind of pushing it forward and backwards. Adjust that aperture a good bit. So you can see now I'm getting really out of focus. So you can see that the focus distance is back there by the tree, but if I pull that focus distance back a bit, I'm going to start showing up. Let's go even more. So now I'm about to where the books are. I can pull it back even more. I'm starting to see some of the text in focus. The tree's now out of focus. So again, you can adjust all that with your aperture, the intensity there. So just adds a little bit more realism to it. Now, another thing you can do that I would do is add a little bit of this is a bit of a more complex step, but add a slight wiggle to your camera so that it has a sort of a breathing, floating motion. So I would do that actually on the camera layer. So I would hit P on the keyboard to get my position. And what you want to do is I'm going to hold down Option. I'm going to click on that stopwatch, and it's going to bring this up. And that's going to look a little confusing, but if you just type wiggle, parentheses, and you're basically telling it the amount versus the time. So, or maybe it's the other way around, time versus the amount. So we'll say, every frame move 30 pixels. Let's see what that does. I'm going to drop my quality down just a bit. Oh no. There we go. Actually, I'm going to move this back this way. So you can see how everything's kind of wiggling a little bit, right? So if I bump that up even more, go to 60. So it's moving, it's even wiggling even more. If I added made that 10, you can get even a better example. Now it's shaking like an earthquake. And I would do something very subtle, so probably like 0.5 and 30. And then I'd also do the same thing to the wiggle or the rotation. So I'm going to copy that expression. I'm going to hit click on the camera, hit R, right, or hold down Alt and Option, click on the orientation button, and then I'm going to paste that in. And these need to be a lot more subtle. So I'm going to do like 0.2 by 1. Those are, I guess, degrees. So now let's see what happens. It's very subtle rotation. Let's bump it up to like 5 and see what that looks like. So now you can see that you're all over the place, and that's just not good. So it's kind of does its own thing, but you get the idea. So maybe we could bump that number up a bit, like 0.8. Let's see. So obviously that's just way too much, but I'm just showing you an example of what that wiggle expression does. So it's randomly adjusting the position and the rotation based on the numbers that you put in. So that's kind of it. So I think that really about covers that scene. Really, I use those same types of techniques for the whole scene. I mean, there's a few other little things in there, but for the whole project. But that kind of is the gist of this entire project. So I hope that helps. Hope you learned something. Please post something in the comments. If you're watching this on YouTube, then post in the comments or join our Facebook group and join the conversation there. If you're in the Facebook group, thanks for being a part of it. I hope that you learned something. Let me know if you got stuck on anything, if you had any questions on anything, and I look forward to doing some more of these. Take care.